Wow. Metal note. Don't overdo this.
Right, the Queen isn't dead yet, but if I end up announcing it while I'm recording this vlog, I will not be surprised. So I was filming the last vlog and I got the news that she is ill at Balmoral and the kids are going to see her, and it's not looking good. So if they declare Operation London Bridge while I'm talking about Reign episode 7, I won't be surprised, but it'll still be a very interesting thing to happen. Obviously, because of scheduling, this probably is going to be out in November or October, so you probably know for ages that the Queen is dead and that she's long and buried, but it's looking closer and closer like this is it. Well, she had to go sometime. She is in her 90s after all. The history tends to happen while I'm talking about terrible TV shows. Although this is my favourite episode so far, mostly because of Megan Follows' performance as Catherine de Medici. She is awesome. Yes, while I was having a break between recording, I tied up my hair again into the curlers. Hopefully they'll last a little bit longer this time. I can't remember how, I think they've been in here for about 45 minutes now, so maybe if we're lucky, they'll look nice. So this episode is a rather dramatic episode to have before the halfway point of your series, but funnily enough, it does a lot of plot relevant things. There is trouble in the provinces of France, so King Henri leaves the court and he goes off to fetch them, and there is going to be a visit from Italians. I can't remember where exactly these Italians come from, I'm just going to check. Count Vincent of Italy, or Vincente. Is it Vincente in Italian? Or Vincento? But they just say of Italy, I don't think they actually say where. But it was, obviously it's northern Italy. There was a time when the French and the Italians, or northern Italian city-states were at war with the French, and there was stuff that happened. And Count Vincent, as we'll call him, had his son imprisoned, and then he was eventually able to release his son by paying a hefty ransom to King Henri, and then freed his son. But what they don't know, but then his son died of dysentery on the way home, and now Count Vincent is plotting revenge, and this episode is his revenge, or failed attempt at revenge. Oh, I should actually make sure that people know, trigger warning for later in the episode, because the girls nearly get sexually assaulted by Count Vincent and his men, by Kenna especially, because she's the king's mistress. I mean, I'll put trigger warnings in when it gets to that scene where they all nearly get assaulted. Henri believes that there's an uprising in the provinces, so he and a huge contingent of soldiers and guards leave the castle, all the best guards, so leaving only some elderly ones to look after the castle, while Mary, Catherine de Medici and Francois entertain Count Vincent, thinking, oh, it's just a simple diplomatic visit, and Catherine is interested in conversing with another Italian. Francois and Mary are still not talking to each other because of the whole Olivia and Bassi thing. Bassi was originally going to go with his father, but he stayed behind, and he's just lying low with his mother, and his mother's talking to her son about the possibility of being legitimised and put into the line of succession, because if he wants Mary, he can't have Mary because he's a bastard, but he could have Mary if he was in the line of succession. And this will start a whole series of plot lines later in the episodes that will dominate a lot of the narratives, but it feels so very pointless when you realise Mary's going to marry Francois, there's nothing you can do about it. Germaine gets a letter from her family asking how her progress is with finding a rich husband, and she's just like, oh god, this is so tiresome, but I have to do this for my sisters, and I have to do this for my family. And her boyfriend, who I still don't know the name of, is just cheering her up, and then he shows her how to flip an omelette, but she ends up flipping it onto the floor, and this scene actually does work. This scene actually is relevant because we will see that skillet again later on. And also, one of the first scenes with Mary and Francois, just before the Italians arrive, is that Francois is teaching his brother how to use a fork. These new fandangled things called forks. This is a fan, but you know what a fork looks like. Back in those times, people didn't actually use knives and forks. Well, they used knives, but they didn't use forks, and very, very rarely used spoons. There was a lot of eating with your hands in that time. Well, forks were a thing all the way back in the Iron Age and that, but people were using forks in the 10th century. But it was Catherine de Medici that really introduced the common use of the fork at the court of France. Yeah, but I think it was mostly a thing used by nobles. It wasn't a commonplace thing to be used by everyone in Europe until at least the 17th century. Because before then, a lot of the commoners, they probably would have just eaten off a knife, or would have just eaten with their hands, obviously. Sometimes they might have used spoons to ladle stuff in and out. So yeah, Germaine and her boyfriend decide, why don't we just sort of sneak off together and go for a picnic? And Germaine decides to dress up in servant's garb in disguise. It's all very thrilling. And I thought, oh, so during all of this, she's not going to be there. She's going to miss the whole thing. Or like, she's going to be able to do something because she's dressed as a servant. And the second they're about to leave, however, that is when Count Vincent's men attack the castle and they seize everything. The servants are all brought into the kitchens where they can be kept an eye on, and the men seize Diane and Bassie, and Bassie is put in the dungeon. I don't know where Diane goes, but Diane pays good money so they don't harm Bassie. At some point Bassie does try to escape, but he's captured again and they have to chain him up. And this is all Vincent's revenge against Catherine and Henri for the death of his son, and he's the last of his line, so he lost his heir, so he's going to punish Henri by killing his son. Catherine tries to offer him gold, but no amount of gold is going to bring his son back from the dead, so Francois, being the noble person that he is, suggests putting himself forward to be the hostage. But Mary and Catherine both know that if Francois does this, Francois will not survive the trip back to Italy. They're going to kill him, and Vincent also plans on taking Francois's younger brothers as well. The one's called Charles. What was the other one called? Was it Henri? I think it was Henri, I can't remember. So Mary and her ladies and Catherine de Medici form a plan to get everyone out the castle, including Francois, Charles and the little one, while Mary and Catherine and her ladies are having dinner with Count Vincent, and Catherine offers herself up to sacrifice herself. Like, she says, I promise you I will be the last one out of that dining room. And Mary gets Bertha / Clarissa to mark the passageways out of the castle to safety, and Olivia has to wait at the entrance to a secret passageway to let everyone in and out. However, Olivia is an idiot. It was actually pretty intense sometimes. I liked the way that they planned everything out. I just love the dedication that Megan Follows has to playing Catherine de Medici. She is the best performance in this entire series. Again, it's like watching Becoming Elizabeth, and Romola is the best performance in this, and you just wish the series was about her. To be honest, I actually do like Reign a lot better than I like Becoming Elizabeth. Probably because it's not as boring and the main character actually does stuff. Tetley, what are you doing? She has to do this thing where she plays with the water fountain bit. She has to stick her paw in and move things about a bit before she can actually start drinking from it. Mary is terrified for Francois because she knows that if Vincent gets his way, Francois will definitely die, and this settles their row from earlier. Why does it always take the threat of death to settle a row? Why? Francois manages to escape from their guards by tricking him into going into the room, and then before he gets his brothers to look away while he stabs the guard with a candlestick, and they all rush up. He gets them to safety. Olivia screws up the plan. Well, Olivia doesn't like Mary because she's jealous of Mary, and she knows that Francois actually does love Mary because while they were sleeping together, at the height of passion, Francois called out her name. Ooh dear. She doesn't like the idea that she has to be the one that has to wait in the dark and open the secret passageways, even though Catherine and Mary fully state that she has to do it because she's the only one that's not going to be missed, whereas they'll miss Mary and Catherine if they don't show up at dinner. Ed, hey Tetley. So during the dinner scene, we definitely know that Catherine has something up her sleeve, but she hasn't told Mary or her ladies about it and just asked them to trust her. And
I know what you're thinking. It's what any woman would think. But I've come to tell you not to be afraid. I'll be there when you enter the room, and I'll be there when you leave. Get through this night, and these men will be gone from your lives.
And suddenly you care about us.
Lola, she wants to help.
Please, when has the French court not been full of evil men? And women? Since we got here, we've been lied to by people who smile and say pretty things as they stab us in the back. At least these men don't pretend to be our friends.
You come in here mouthing platitudes, but you have no idea what this is like. To have a target on your back.
I know exactly what this is like. When I was 8 years old, rebels stormed the Florentine palace. Both my parents were already dead. But my name and my family's fortunes made me a target. War doesn't spare children. I was held hostage for years, until finally they had to decide what to do with this Medici girl. Many of the soldiers, men just like these, they demanded that I be turned over to them so that I would be shared. The nuns and I prayed. We prayed for God to send the Pope and his armies to retake the city and rescue me in time. And then one day, the laughter stopped. It grew quiet. And I stepped out into the sunlight, over their bodies. And Pope Clement welcomed me into his arms. I emerged intact, and so will you if you have faith.
she's saying, I will do the dirty work. I will do what must be done. For I am Catherine de Medici. I am the queen of fuck around and find out. So they all go to dinner, and Catherine, this is very important, Catherine offers the men a massive chest full of gold, and all of Count Vincent's men reach and grab fistfuls of the gold. Then Catherine gets a sand timer and she turns it over and puts it in front of her. And we don't know what that is just yet, but it's an interesting ticking clock. That's a very good use of Hitchcock's bomb under the table there. So Charles gets the servants out. Germaine doesn't want to leave Mary in case Mary gets left behind, and he's not going to leave Germaine. And then a guard comes in, realises the servants are all gone, and Germaine and her boyfriend fight him. And while the guard is fighting her boyfriend, she gets the skillet from earlier and she whacks him round the head with it.
Frying pans! Who knew, right?
And that knocks him out face down, and they don't know if he's dead. So her boyfriend grabs a butcher's knife or a carving knife and he slits the man's throat, and he tells her, now neither of us will know. So Olivia, she's clearly been waiting in the dark because she has like a really tall candle at the start of like when she's put in the passageway initially, and obviously by the time Francois shows up it's burned down quite a bit. And while Francois is getting everyone out, she begs him to take her with him, and he says, no, you've got to wait for Mary. Eventually she just chickens out and runs away. So by the time it's Mary and her lady's turn to get out of to get the hell out of Dodge, they aren't there to escape, and they're dragged back into the dining room. That's when Catherine turns a bit desperate and she says, like, look, don't take my sons. Is this gold not enough? She's playing for time. Then she goes a bit too far, and this is trigger warning time. Okay, so I'll put in a little card to say when that scene ends. So if you don't want to know what happens in that scene, or if it's too much for you, just trigger warning for attempted sexual. So Catherine offers the girls to the guards. The ones to focus on obviously are Kenna and Mary. Mary gets grabbed by Vincent and what's the word for it? She gets thrown on the table and begs her for forgiveness, for he is not a gentleman. And Kenna, who was nearly assaulted by one of Vincent's guards earlier, now who now knows that she's the king's mistress, throws her to the floor, and he starts beating her quite violently. And it was Amy and Susan, they get pulled away by other guards, but then Catherine grabs the sand timer, throws it to the ground, and because I think the sand timer's very nearly run out, and she says like, don't think you have, something along the lines of like, don't think you have won at all, you will not hurt them. And then all seems lost, but then all of a sudden the guards start dying, but all the guards basically, they start dropping like flies, and Vincent is trying to work out how, and it's kind of like, think of like the opening to season 7 of Game of Thrones, where all of a sudden they just start dying, and the person who poisoned them is just like, oh, my curls have fallen flat again. I hate this. Then he realises that the gold that she offered to the men was poisoned, because the girls would obviously, they never would have touched it. And then, so they all drop like flies, and the girls are saved, except for Mary, who still has to deal with Vincent. But while he's distracted, she grabs Chekov's fork and she stabs him in the throat with it. And then before he can hurt her, Francois bursts onto the scene because he was too worried about Mary, and he slashes his hand off. Very CGI PG-13 motion, and it's kind of like with Germaine and her boyfriend, where it's just like, you know, we do this together. And yeah, Mary's got a body count, however small, and that's how it's all sorted. Catherine is a little bit remorseful about, you know, the girls nearly getting assaulted, and Kenna is being supported by Susan and Aylee, and the way she's holding her side clearly shows that like her ribs must have been broken in that beating, and out of the 4 of them she's the most bloodied up. And they take her to the infirmary. And you know, the whole time watching that scene, I was just like, holy crap, this is awesome. And then in the aftermath, after Bassie's released and reunited with his mother, and oh, Olivia, sorry, I forgot about Olivia. Olivia, who wandered off before Mary could arrive, she gets lost in the secret passageways, and then all of a sudden a candle goes out, and she's like, what are you? And then we never see her again. I mean, she does appear, I had to check the wiki to make sure that she's not dead. She does appear at some point later on, maybe in this series, maybe in this season, maybe later on, but she's not dead. But she has been, it was probably Bertha's fault, I don't know. I'm guessing it was Bertha. Bertha is capable of murder, as you'll see in the next episode. Oh, they finally used the word Dauphin. Count Vincent addresses Francois as the Dauphin repeatedly. And it turns out that Diane helped with this infiltration in order to get Henri's legitimate sons out the way, so Bassie could be legitimised, and Bassie is like, I don't want it. No one seems to know or care what happened to Olivia. Either Francois goes to see Mary or she's gone to see him, I was not keeping track, and he ends up their passion from the whole thing runneth over, and they go and do it. And they start making out, and they get on the bed, and he says, tell me when you want me to stop, and she says never. And I was like, ah, consent, enthusiastic consent, this is what I'm here for. Although the way that, because this is the last scene of the episode, the way it pans away to show them making out on the bed, I honestly thought it was going to show someone was watching them, because it reminded me a lot of this season 4 episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where Buffy and Riley have a great night slaying together, and then they go back to his room and they start having sex for the first time, and it turns out that they're being watched by season 4's first main antagonist, Maggie Walsh, in a really weird Oedipal Mama's Boy way, where she's always keeping an eye on the members of the Initiate. It makes sense in context. But I honestly thought, oh my god, they're gonna pan to like behind the walls where either Bertha or Catherine are watching this. So I was just wondering, where was Nostradamus for the whole thing? Shame he didn't see this coming. It's one of those seasons. It's one of those shows where like characters where you wonder where the hell they are just sort of disappear for entire episodes at a time. You're just wondering, where were they during all this? Once again, my pet peeve of people trying to have secret meetings and discuss plans, despite despite speaking at full volume, totally being able to be overheard, came up again, because obviously when Mary and Catherine are talking about how they're going to stop Francois from being taken away, they're talking quite loudly, and there's a guard right outside the door. I was thinking, couldn't that be a scene where it shows that they might have switched to speaking in a different language that your average Italian guard wouldn't be able to understand? Like maybe he could understand French, but or even Latin, but maybe they could have started speaking Greek because Mary Queen of Scots could speak Greek. Maybe they could be speaking English. Maybe they could speak Scots. I'm not sure. Catherine de Medici would understand Scots, but they could have at least shown that they knew how to be discreet when making these plans, but they just sort of worked. I think they're mostly because of the fact that Catherine didn't tell anyone her plan to poison the guards, because she says, like, I've known that secrets being held by more than one person don't stay secret for long. And she has taught Mary a valuable lesson about being dependent on yourself. Do not depend on a man to rescue you. And they come away with this with a sort of grudging respect for each other, even though their rivalry is only going to get stronger. Yeah, the costumes. Oh, back to the let's talk about the worst dress award and some of the other pet peeves I had with some of these costumes. A lot of the costumes looked awful. The black dress Mary wears at the first half of the episode, it looks as if the dress was too big for her and it kept slipping off the shoulders. So they were just like, oh fuck it, we'll leave it like that. As if like the start of every single take she was pulling at the shoulders, and then because she had to walk like this a lot, they just kept slipping down and they couldn't think of any way to keep them up. The scene Mary wears for the banquet, this red and white number looks like a prom dress if it was worn by Strawberry Shortcake. It was also equally hideous. It was a scene towards the beginning of the episode where Catherine is talking to Olivia. I could see Olivia's bra straps underneath her lace sleeves. I could literally see her bra straps. But the worst dress in this episode, I'm going to give it to Kenna's butterfly bodice, because it looks cheap. It looks cheap. That's episode 7 of Reign. It was a really fun episode to watch when you're just like, oh my god, like look at all of this escalation. Oh, how's it going to go? And it didn't disappoint in the climax. It showed that Catherine is a very ruthless individual, and you can threaten her all you like, but the second you go after her children, you are dead. You are already dead. And the next episode is sort of interesting, mostly because it's got a significant death in it. I'm sure if you've already seen the first, if you've already watched the show, you know what I'm talking about. If you've seen the other 11, if you've seen the vlogs that are already up, then be interested. I'm not going to say who's going to die, but when you find out who dies, it's pretty obvious this person obviously was always going to die because they're the least relevant. So yes, thank you for watching. The next episode is called Fated, and if you don't want to miss the next vlog, please make sure that you subscribe. This is a really interesting series to talk about, mainly because it's just insane the levels they go to, the plots they go to that don't actually matter in the end. Obviously I'm liking it a lot more than the last 2 seasons of Game of Thrones, and I'm finding it a lot more fun to watch than Becoming Elizabeth, and not nearly as infuriating. Let's just keep watching and hope that Megan Follows will help us through with her amazing performance. So thank you to my patrons also for supporting the channel while I'm making these videos, and a special thank you to my King and Queen patrons who get a shout out in the credits. So thank you Alison Cuff, Larissa, Lady Eternal, Leslie Williams and Jill Minero. Thanks so much. What do you say, Tetley? Should we leave it for today and start on the next one? Let me just check my phone real quick. The Queen's not dead yet, but Harry and Meghan are on their way to Balmoral to see her. Methinks they're going to be talking about the line of succession. We'll find out. You'll probably know by the time this video goes live on YouTube. If the Queen actually survives until this video actually goes live on YouTube, I will be very, very surprised.